Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
And here we are for another episode in our 4,862 part series on the non-ordinary mind. Welcome, Dr. Richard Schulman.
Welcome, Dr. Marcus Welby.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you kick us off with the mental wealth tip of the day?
Yes, I can. But before I do.
Oh, yes. We must honor Mother Nature and the lightning bolts.
We won. It was
twice. Twice.
Yeah, it was great because we got to celebrate 2 Stanley Cups. So it was a lot of fun. Very interesting being in the stadium with 19,000 souls who were not afraid of being together.
Like old times.
Even the commissioner, who everybody boos, said it felt normal for the first time.
That's
I had a visceral reaction to going into the stadium, not fear, relief. It was very tender to be there with all those people. And of course, it was better that we won, but
that's awesome.
Before the game even started, there was a tremendous excitement that I think went beyond the game. People were just happy to be doing stuff together.
I think it's on par with our topic today, too.
I know, that's why I decided to say it.
No,
let me give a mental wealth tip to begin. The mental wealth tip for today has to do with love.
All you need is love.
Yes, all you need is love, but that's not the tip. Although it could be.
Beatles thought it was.
John Lennon liked that a lot.
Yeah.
The mental wealth tip of the day is that we tend to love the way we wish to be loved rather than the way our partner would like to be loved. And it's very important to find that out if you want your partner to feel loved, which is, very preferable to any other solution to that relationship issue.
That is money in the bank right there.
Got it, boss.
That's like mental lottery tip right there. It's
like winning the Stanley Cup.
I had a thought last night. We're all just wandering around trying to begin to discover that we don't know the first thing about our mind and our brain and our behavior. And one of our duties and responsibilities to ourselves is to learn how to operate this machine.
Absolutely.
And I think what excites us is thinking it, giving it more facets with all the shows that we've done, and thinking about consciousness, thinking about non-ordinary states, thinking about psi phenomenon or curiosities, or anytime we can just go down the rabbit hole. But today's feel-good topic, of course, is on mass casualty events.
Feel good, people.
More like the psychology of it. And this is sort of our cocktail party conversation. We'll see where it goes. I have a few leads, a couple of phone numbers. But
mass parties, and you're not telling me, I'm going to be pretty salty,
I'm not telling you who. So, I'm not even going to define a mass casualty event because it's actually not terribly important, but that's basically when, something happens that the response is inadequate to meet the demands or the needs of a disaster or an event. So we're going to just kind of talk about some of the more model events in history, and I think the more memorable ones, and weird ways people behaved and reacted around them. That's really what I want to focus on, is how we think, process, deny, react when there's something mass event going on, because it's different. We've talked about sports psychology, we talked about mob mentality, we talked about how people behave differently in groups. People behave differently when they're driving their car. You'll say and do things in your car that you wouldn't face to face with that person. People behave completely bad on the internet
I was about to say internet stones, man.
Yeah. So that to me absolutely fascinates me because our psychology is betraying us. We're treating people differently, and to me that says you have no clue who you are. Like
Yeah,
you're so insecure
I
with
don't think it's
yourself.
betraying us. I think we don't have a clue is closer to the fact it is what it is. It doesn't betray us. We just don't know. Most people don't have a clue. You know, people come in my office and they'll say, "Well, I don't know who I am," or some version of that. I always say, "You like chocolate or vanilla ice cream better?" They look at me like I have three heads. I said, "Well, if you know which kind of I so they say chocolate." I said, "Well, how do you know?" They say, "Well, I prefer the taste of chocolate." I said, "Well, now you know something about yourself. You might want to continue that." The thing that we do know, since we're talking about mass casualty events or incidents, I'm not sure what we call
Well,
them.
technically, they're called mass casualty incidents in the social psychology world, but I think they're more commonly referred to colloquially as the mass casualty event.
Well, you know,
Um,
we seem to be drawn to these things. You know, I remember as a kid, they talked about something they called rubbernecking. Okay,
mhm.
and that, you
I almost
know,
put that in the show, by the way. That's kind of eerie.
what it referred to was if there was a wreck on the freeway, they would say delays on the Van Wyck Expressway this morning due to a 16-car accident, and the delays are due to rubberneckers. You know, they're wanting to look at it. So we seem to be drawn to these things. Um, you know, we'll hear about those 16 people who died in a mass pileup on the freeway, but maybe there were 160 who died of heart attacks or other kinds of illnesses around the same city that day that doesn't seem to make the news, and nobody outside of the family, nobody cares. So we seem to be drawn to
We're
these.
going to keep hitting that theme because I don't think you or I could totally grasp this, which is why it's excited us. We're like a cat with a ball of yarn here, trying to figure this out. So let's dive right in. And I want to talk about some of the, I would just say, prototypical mass event, or maybe more current event, mass casualty
Now,
event.
would you include in that mass casualty, and this, I'm guessing the answer would be no, but when a famous person dies and and there's a mass people either mourning or discussing that person, does it have to do with just that there's a massive loss of life, or can it be something that everyone is drawn to?
I like where you're going because that's where I wanted to go more with the show is why are we all drawn to that more? But does that meet the definition of a mass casualty event? Not at all. But possibly like when I was living in Fort Lauderdale, studying hospice, I would have to. While I was living in Miami, I was commuting to Fort Lauderdale, and I don't try to explain Miami to anyone unless you live there. It's you don't know what you're doing. Um, though I-95 is totally shut down. There's helicopters everywhere, and I'm thinking there's only two things that can cause this kind of response. One, a terrorist attack, or two, a dead celebrity. And of course, it was option number two, Anna Nicole Smith. And maybe in that sense, and that in your example, maybe Anna Nicole just being as famous as she was, and the where she died in the hotel, the way that she died, maybe it did overwhelm on some logistical level because having to keep crowd control and then fight for the body and where's it gonna go and who's gonna do it. Of course, she's dead at that point, so I'm gonna go with no, but we are seeking out that similar psychology because I think it's behind some of the other events that we're going to talk about. Like most recently, the Surfside condo collapse. Um, that really left an indelible emotional imprint, as it should, on people from all over the world. Like we like to think everyone cares about what Americans are doing. They don't, but they know more than you would think.
Well, they think of us like we think of people who live in California. You know, that they think that we're a little
Yeah.
out of our minds, but they wonder how we do what we do, you know.
Yeah, they're rubbernecking us.
And I was thinking, you know, that the Surfside event would be particularly impactful for the people in the building right next to it, you know.
That's a really good observation. It's a really good thought. I was thinking about them. I was thinking about all the people that wanted to go back up in the remaining tower and get their knickknacks and tallywhacks, or maybe get their car out of the garage below. And the city, of course, saying, nope.
Yeah.
We got to demolish this thing for the hurricane. So there's a psychology of that too. Like, why, like that, those people would be traumatized not only by witnessing the other building, but having all of their stuff sit there knowing it's going to be demolished and then watching it be demolished.
So it occurs to me that part of this mass casualty stuff is similar to post-traumatic stress.
A lot of features.
That it would activate whatever traumas people had on board already.
Some do and some don't. So where do they stop? Like, for instance, let's look at I'm a big space nut, you know that. Me and Elon, I call him at home. But we had Apollo 1. 3 men died on the pad. The very first flagship of the Apollo series to get us to the moon. We couldn't even get these guys, we couldn't even get the door open to save their lives on the pad.
I can remember when that event happened.
So it had an impact.
Totally.
And why such a powerful impact? Did you know those 3 guys? Like you
I know, it's pretty amazing, but you know,
you probably ran over 3 guys with your car on the way over here, and you didn't even notice.
Maybe more. Well, I still remember their names.
Rarely say stuff funny. I'm just saying.
Gus Grissom, Ed White, and
Virgil.
Roger Chafee. Virgil Ivan. You know his middle name was Ivan?
No, it was Virgil Gus Grissom.
His middle name was Ivan, but because of the U.S.-Russia stuff, that's sort of an extra trivia tip.
Austin's gonna fact check that.
But he didn't want anybody to know because, you know, the Ruskies were our enemies then. I don't know. I think they're our enemies again, are they? I can't remember.
No. Oh,
they're our friends now?
You're talking about the Soviets.
I don't watch much news, so
there are no Soviets.
Okay. Well, I just said Ruskies. I didn't say Soviets. It's like in Dr. Strangelove, you know? I'm going to go get those Ruskies.
Exactly like Strangelove.
General Buck Turgensen. So, okay, so we're going to mass. Speaking of mass casualty.
Well, so no, we were talking about Apollo 1. Why did those 3 people create such a psychological impact? Was it the death of the dream to go to the moon? Was it the death of the audacity of hope? Was it the death of young potential? Was it the death of possibly the space program and the uncertainty and the fear of, oh my gosh, we can't even get this right. How are we going to get off the ground?
I think that we can't even get this right was a big deal. You know, our rockets blow up or something.
Blow to the ego?
The national ego, perhaps. But I think that people project onto famous people things that may not be there, or people doing, you know, sort of amazing things. And those astronauts were like pop stars, you know, back in the day.
Well, so let's look at Challenger and Columbia, 2 other horrible space disasters. I cried my eyes out, and 7 people died in each.
Well, you know, I got to tell you that when Tom Petty died, I cried my eyes out as if he was a person that I knew well. I think our psyches tend to attach to certain things.
Why?
Well, yeah, that's the question, because I didn't cry when George Harrison died. I don't know why I cried.
I didn't cry during 9/11.
No, I didn't either.
Really? Because I just felt like I was a horrible person for saying
until I found out that someone I personally knew.
Of course. So
I
there's
was,
a
I
personal
think I was
connection.
walking around in shock that day.
I
I
think,
don't know.
yeah, there was a lot of shock.
I was kind of in a daze, and my best friend worked in the World Trade Center for a while, and we couldn't figure out if he was still there. If he was some best friend, we never talked about it. I found out at the end of the day, because all the communications was down, that he had moved out of there and he was actually in Japan. And 5 minutes later, I found out my cousin was missing. There was an unreality to that. I don't know why I didn't cry that day. I cried later, but I didn't cry
Yeah,
that
but
day.
that's, I mean, that's interesting because I didn't cry that day, and maybe it was because more of shock. It wasn't disbelief. I knew damn well what was going on, and I knew damn well what we were going to do 3 months later. That I got right away. But I did cry with both Columbia and Challenger. Now, don't forget, on Challenger we had Krista McAuliffe, which was the first civilian and the first teacher to go to
Right.
space. So again, it was like it was similar to the Apollo 1 in that, bam, we lost all these 7 souls, and we also lost the civilian teacher. This is for everyone.
I remember that day really, really clearly. And I don't know if this was part of it, and maybe it's just because we live in Florida. But I remember saying to my ex, they're never going to launch today because it's too cold. Everything will freeze. And when I heard they were still going to launch, I said, I think this is crazy. Why don't they wait a day?
It was in the 20s on the
It was in
bed.
the 20s that morning. And I was working on a inpatient psych unit at the VA then. And it was fascinating watching the reactions of the patients, especially the more psychotic ones, because that was sort of I don't know, to me, that was the inner fear that they were going to disintegrate like that ship did. And they did that day. That was a crazy day on the unit. Now, I don't know if everybody has that in their psyche somewhere. I know it affected people deeply. And some of these events, like President Kennedy being murdered, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, affected me as a young person tremendously.
The
Those are
attempted,
not those are not mass casualty events, but they're mass cultural casualty events. Maybe that's the way to
right.
think of it.
But Ronald Reagan's assassination attempt was a big deal, because it's an attack on your sense of security and
Right.
safety. So
And
that's your
maybe
president.
that's connected to the astronauts as well. We didn't know them personally, yet we kind of thought we did.
Yeah, and they represented our sense of maybe not security, maybe not safety, maybe our sense of exploration, or our sense of uh, did I just say exploration?
Yeah, well, maybe they represented us.
The
We
best of us, yeah.
something like, we send people to do things that we can't do. I mean, you have an incredible painting behind you. So some artists had to go into that world and get that image and bring it back for the rest of us who can't go there. I mean, the astronauts go into space and do things, that we can't do. So if it hits our inner world as something interesting or something we'd like to do, and considering you and I are both science fiction geeks, um, well, maybe
Speak for
not you,
yourself.
but I certainly am. Um, yeah.
I have action
Um,
figures.
Artists, authors, explorers, they go into that world to bring it back for us.
Yes.
Composers. So I don't know if when one of them dies, something dies that's more cultural.
Yes. That's exactly what I'm trying to get at. And maybe it's like there's an unconscious fear of, well, this is what you get for trying to better yourself, to push your
And
limit.
I was actually thinking, believe it or not, I was thinking something similar at the game the other night. Why are all these people, including me, by the way, so concerned about what guys that we don't know personally wearing a certain kind of laundry? I mean, that's you know, what the team colors are, and I do like the colors. Um, why would that affect us so emotionally? My kids were practically crying. I mean, I've never seen them so happy as men that they don't know ever and are not going to know. They don't make any money off this. In fact, we paid money, and you would think we won. The way that the people were responding, and I know the way my kids are, the way they responded was very, very powerful to this event that they don't know anybody
So
personally.
there's a perspective there. It's definitely a perspective of is this your home, or your hometown, your
Well,
homies,
we're back, you know, we're back to
your
why were people upset at 9/11? Okay, 3,000 people died, but 3,000 people die all the time, not all in one clump. But, you know, people die of cancer, they die of heart disease, they die of car wrecks, all kinds of things every day. Nobody seems to care.
well, look at the Indonesian tsunami years back. It killed way more than 3,000 people. How does anyone remember it? It
I
didn't
mean,
happen
I
on our
actually do
soil.
remember it, but I wasn't that upset about it. I remember thinking, wow, that's pretty weird that it would.
It's weird that I'm not upset that
Yeah,
11,000 people
yeah.
died or whatever.
And yet, you know, if you see an animal, a dog dying in a movie, you're going to be, you know, handkerchiefs everywhere.
Oh yeah, Niagara
So
Falls, Frankie Angel.
yeah, so the idea of how do we
Hey,
respond?
anyone knows what movie that quote was from? Put it in the link below. Because I know.
He knows all kinds of stuff that other people don't know. He knows stuff that I don't know. It's very uh, odd. It's uncanny what he knows.
Wait, are we talking about me in the third person?
Well, I'm talking to the viewers,
Oh, okay.
both of them.
Moving on. So there's so when we're talking about, let's just call them MCEs. So it sounds like we know what we're talking about. We're talking about MCEs. There's both natural and then unnatural. So something that was unnatural, um, like these shooting sprees that people do, these mass shootings. That's very different than an earthquake, psychologically speaking, because there is a nefarious intent in one that's more incredulous. Like, how could these kids bring these guns to these school and kill all these people? Versus an earthquake happen, and you're not like, how could the Earth's crust decide to do this to me? Doesn't the Earth know who I am? So, perspective, whether or not it's natural or unnatural, a lot of whether or not it attacks your sense of security or safety, or maybe your identity or ideology. So the Indonesian thing didn't really affect us because it didn't affect our safety or our security. It didn't affect our identity because these are humans. They probably should, but it didn't for whatever reason, because we don't know them.
Right. But we didn't know the people at 9/11. I mean, I did, but we didn't, most people didn't know anybody at 9/11.
But the symbolic attack on those buildings, or the symbolic damage to the buildings, was an attack on the heart of America. And all Americans resonated with that. Like, oh, hell no. You know, if they had done this on a twin set of buildings in Houston, would we have had a similar response? Or how, more importantly, how would that have been differently?
It depends
I
on
mean,
which
there were
buildings. I don't know Houston at all, but I think if enough
two
people
bank
died,
buildings.
what's that?
Let's just say 2 skyscrapers.
I think if enough people died and enough TV cameras were aimed at this thing, it would have affected us. Although I don't know that we would have gone to war.
Would it have been the exact same as them hitting towers in New York?
I say no.
Yeah, why? I would say no too, but I don't know why. I think because it attacks our sense of security and safety even more than if it were Texas. or Portland. Let's pick on somewhere else.
Symbolically, you know, that those twin towers were iconic, I guess.
They're iconic. They're a sense of
Yeah.
financial power and strength and security for America. They represent the international money exchange, you know, the World Bank headquarters, yada, yada, whatever else was in there. And they were snuffed out. So that touches on some of the psychological differences. And it's actually very hard to think about this because it's a little ineffable to put this stuff into words.
Well, I mean, but it all revolves around fear.
Fear's in every one of them, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, fear is a very powerful motivator. You know, they asked Hermann
most
Goering.
Powerful.
They asked Hermann Goering, who was Hitler's second in command, how did you get the German people to both be okay with and then actually commit atrocities? He said, you know, fear. Get them fearful enough you can get them to do anything. So my guess is that when we're looking at these events, whether it's 9/11 or an earthquake or Fukushima, let's say, fear will motivate the response.
Well, and it's interesting you should say that because shortly after a lot of these disasters and the recent events happened, what did we start coming up with? We came up with these color-coded threat
Homeland
levels,
Security.
right? Like Homeland Security Advisory System, threat level yellow, or DEFCON, even going back for
Here's my
defense.
Homeland Advisory, the Oracle says.
The DEFCON 4, DEFCON 5, all of that is color coded as well, I guess. Well, maybe that's number coded, but it's this level of fear to tell you how ready you should be, but really how scared you should be. Now, the difference is there's training and infrastructure put there, and that's one of the ways that you can mitigate paralyzing fear.
Well, I was thinking actually recently, I was watching the Weather Channel regarding the storm that just came through here, and it went breaking news, and you got that big red panel. It says Elsa now a force 1 hurricane. The winds were up, I think, 3 miles per hour, but because it hit a certain.
Did it hit Florida ever as of Category 1?
I don't think so. It might
give an answer to that
area. I don't know, but it certainly was a nothing burger around here.
Well, it's a technicality, but if it landed at any point, I think it bounced off like 2 or 3 times. If it ever landed as a Category 1, that was the first hurricane to hit Florida in July in 95 years.
Wow.
So put that in your climate pipe and smoke it.
Okay, I sure will.
Here's another thought for you.
Okay.
During a war, you've got the same foxhole buddies, the same bombs, the same shells, the same enemies, the same tanks, the same threats, the same smells, the same sights, the same sounds, but 2 different people. One of those guys is going to walk out with severe PTSD, and the other guy is going to walk out of there with an acute stress reaction and get over it.
Well, I mean, we tend to think of soldiers as, to coin a phrase, sort of, well, robotic, uniform. And I knew a guy who was a squad leader in Somalia, of all places. And he told me something that you don't get usually unless people are being really honest. He said, I had 10 guys in my squad. I could count on 2. 2 would pee their pants, 6 would fire into the trees, and 2 I could really count on. So we're not even in the foxhole yet. And the response to that battle situation was different for the different people in the squad. And, you know, I think most people wouldn't be so bitingly honest as this guy was. But I think he was honest because it always occurred to me that people are going to react differently. There was the example in the book I wrote about the guy who was in the roadside bombing in Afghanistan, and
Yeah.
now he's being activated here in Sarasota, because the way the roadside bombings work is a car with the bomb sneaks into the convoy and blows it up. So here in Sarasota, you got a little lady sneaking in on 41 who was activating this guy. Anyway,
I had a similar
we
patient.
went through the roadside bombing where his friends died. He didn't get a dot better. We had to go into his childhood trauma to unpack
Hmm.
what was really going on. So I'm wondering how much of these mass casualty events are activating people's deepest fears and inner traumas, and that's why they're so drawn to them. Because
Well,
people,
it would certainly explain why you see not only a variety of trauma responses, but it might help shed light on some of the weirder ones. For instance, Stockholm Syndrome. You know, a lot of times during mass casualty events, wars, you know, there'll be prisoners of war, there'll be captives, slaves, if you want, um, and they develop Stockholm syndrome. Is that merely an adaptation to try to survive and thrive under extreme restrictions? Yeah, this is what I worry about if the Taliban takes back over in Afghanistan. That all these women that are in school and you know are allowed to behave in a way that they've become accustomed to, being forced to revert back to the rule of the Taliban.
well, we certainly know that Stockholm syndrome is a real thing. You know that people will bond, will sort of trauma bond. Um, but some of the stuff that we talked about earlier, the one that I think is most fascinating is the response to the Holocaust. If you talk about
Yeah,
a mass psychology event, I think while it was happening, uh, people kind of knew a little bit that it was happening, but it was too big an event for people to respond or do anything about. It was only later that people found all the records, and our soldiers went into the camp. American, uh, British and Russian soldiers went into the concentration camps and documented what they found. I think people at first were really in denial. I think some people still are
maybe it
about
was out of sight, out of mind, unless it affected you or someone that
you.
you knew.
Well, you think about it. Okay, so we go back to Seaside, and maybe 70 people are documented as died. I don't know what the figures are.
Last time I checked, it was mid 50s.
Something. All right. So what? So
They
something
found
like
a bunch yesterday.
um. Okay. I would say that across the country, somewhere around that number, probably murdered every day. We don't seem to care unless it's in your neighborhood, but you might care a little more. Somebody you knew. I mean, 9/11 was personal for me. It wasn't personal for everybody. Maybe people
That,
took it as personal.
no, that's a really good point, and actually something I've thought about a lot over the years. Because there's four categories, I think. Well, five, but four. One, well, I guess zero. You were in the building and you died, or you firsthand got out. One, you knew someone personally who died. Then it's both a personal tragedy and a national tragedy. Two, you lived in New York. You didn't know anyone, but that was your town, that was your city, that was your skyline, that was your peeps.
I lived in Sarasota, but I grew up in New York, and that was my
Then
first
that then
thought.
that would be number
My
four.
first
So your
thought was,
connection to it outside the
yeah,
area.
my first thought was I was trying to explain to people why I was so upset. I said, they're attacking my home.
Right.
You say, you live
Right.
in Sarasota now, I said, no, no,
No,
no. It
but
felt like they were
emotionally, it's
attacking.
still
Yeah,
your home, 100%.
yeah.
And five, someone like me who grew up in Florida, have I been there? Yeah, yeah, it's fine and dandy. But I don't know any of those people. That's not my town. This is my country, and we must find the buttholes responsible, which, well, we won't go there. Um,
But 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 wait a second. Finding the buttholes responsible comes back to fear
Well, yeah, yeah,
I
misfinding
mean,
people.
we asked the question, well, how did the Holocaust actually happen? Fear. Fear is behind all of these things.
Well, and
Our
there was some deception. They were telling, that like the Japanese, we were doing the same thing with the Japanese
Oh yeah,
internment
but
camps.
what we did was we say, oh well, these people can't be trusted, so we better
Right,
put
but
them in the
they
internment
they
camps.
said for your own safety, we're going to take you to a
Yeah,
safer.
well, go figure that the government would lie to people. The bottom line is, it's the outsiders that were feeling the fear. Nobody really cared about their safety. It was about fear that these people were not going to be loyal to the government of the United States, and there may be a few of those
So,
like still hanging
so how
around.
does that apply to the kids in cages on the Mexican border? How
I
does the
think we're,
fear?
as a culture, we're more in denial about that. I don't think, and of course they may be, foreign kids don't count as much as American kids.
Yeah, and why? That's bizarre to me. A life should be a life. Some of the most successful, influential people came from some of the most obscure backgrounds.
Well, it's like John Prine said, your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. It's already overcrowded from your dirty little war. Jesus don't like killing no matter what it's for. Your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore. Well, it won't, but we think it will.
Speaking of denial,
Yes,
one stress reaction, wouldn't you agree? And you don't have to agree.
I'll think
But
about it.
what about all the people? And I'm just talking about the psychological stress. So don't take my entire bait here. But is it possible that what we're talking about, the fear and the processing, collective processing, and the mob mentality, social psychology of the deniers of, say, the Boston bombing or the Pentagon, the ones that deny that these events even happened at all and they were just movie real, kind of like the moon landing type of thing. Is it possible that the denial is coming from such fear and grief and loss? It's following a Kubler-Ross first stage of denial, deny it even exists, incredulity,
Well,
shock.
if you think about the grief as in losing your innocence, perhaps losing a worldview, yeah, sure.
Loss of innocence, that's great.
And I've often said to my patients, you're grieving your loss of your illusion of safety, or your illusion of fidelity, or whatever it would be. And the other thing that people grieve is lost time. You put in something to an organization or a person or a group or something, and it falls apart. It sort of goes back to the Buddhism thing about non-attachment. We're attached to certain things. Symbols also. The World Trade Center is a perfect example.
Were they talking about, do you think they were talking about that non-attachment to mass?
I think yes. Well, I don't know that my teacher never said anything like that, but he would say something like, they had a very different view of death. He came from Tibet, and
Okay.
death is just part of life. It was his view. Just, you'll come back. You- you'll come back. What do you wound up about? And if you go into certain of the spiritual texts, like the Bhagavad Gita, it's all about that. These people are going to reincarnate anyway. So what are you getting all wound up about? It? Do your job. You're a soldier. Do your job. We're in the
Speaking of
West. We don't think like that here.
speaking of the Bhagavad Gita, in mass casualty,
Yeah,
uh,
really.
one of my eerie thoughts that I'll never have the answer to is, um, when Oppenheimer said, "I am death, destroyer of worlds," was that an assertion of guilt? Was that, oh my God, I had no idea that this Trinity test site explosion was going to be this devastating? Was that, I'm death, destroyer of worlds? Um, I've always wondered what was going through his mind when he saw that first flash. Because there was something profound psychologically going on
Yeah,
there.
I don't think it was maybe Teller was going but not Oppenheimer. He was
He was
I think
opposed to
he
parts
was
of it.
I think it was beyond his expectations, and he was sort of emotionally punching above his weight class.
Einstein didn't think it would work.
Well, he was wrong about it. It did work.
Which is kind of
Well, that's another mass casualty event, Hiroshima.
It is.
Nagasaki.
Absolutely.
And what occurs to me is, okay, if we wanted to demonstrate how powerful it was, why didn't we pick an uninhabited place to do that? I think that people in the know about humans' reactions to this stuff, and they use it.
Certainly. So we better figure it out. But you were talking about man-made mass casualty events. Like, I mean, the Trinity site was on a mass casualty, but look at Chernobyl, look at Fukushima, look at 3 Mile Island. Hell, look at the Beirut explosion in the Port of Lebanon, right? That was a mass casualty event for sure. And it gained worldwide attention, similar to the Surfside collapse. Although I'm shocked that they're looking at our little buildings falling down over here. That they care or notice. But it's encouraging that they do. I mean, maybe just because if it bleeds, it leads. But I think that there's some sort of on a core level, before some or all of us turn completely rotten, spineless, soulless, living tissue over our metal endoskeletons. I think we can connect to that. That's why I was surprised the Indonesia thing didn't affect people more. It's a lot of loss.
Well,
the
there's
Nepal
there's
earthquake.
also like a media kind of circus that goes around some of these things.
Yeah, but the Beirut was really shocking and horrifying.
The video footage was amazing.
And there's an addition on the nuclear stuff. There's an additional problem because now you've got an environmental catastrophe along with it, which may add it to more of the fear.
I think very often the fear is in that we're going to disintegrate. Our bodies are literally going to disintegrate, and the nuclear stuff goes right for that scenario. Plus, there's an issue. I think this is an issue for current day, and I won't mention anything to do with a certain infectious disease that we're not going to mention.
Oh, the Spanish flu?
Yeah, that one. There's the idea that invisible things are going to get us, or things we can't see. Terrorists would be things we can't see.
Radioactivity.
Infections, radiation. And then, like we can see hurricanes, but we can't predict them. Earthquakes are coming from a place where
sinkholes.
Excuse me, what's that?
Sinkholes.
Yeah,
we have those in Central Florida.
Right.
They happen.
So we tend to be drawn. Rubberneckers on the Van Wyck Expressway. We tend to be drawn. That's why if it bleeds, it leads is in the news all the time.
What do you think about?
Question is why? Is it just a dopamine response from something that's novel?
I don't know about dopamine. Dopamine's usually associated with feel-good stuff. I was thinking it's more like
why do when people go to haunted houses, they come at Halloween they have the fake scary house, and people come out
because adrenaline can excite you.
Okay, so is that happening in these mass casualty events too, or could that be?
I think that might be part of why there's more, maybe not more police shootings, but why that line for a police officer to cross on when to use deadly force is a very, very difficult one for them, because they're having to try to control their own emotions, and they're not trained to do that very well.
Well, if we really cut to the chase scene, stress inoculation would go a long way
Mm-hmm.
to reducing the violence that we see in our culture,
Mm-hmm.
both from the police and from everybody else. Nobody knows how to deal with stress anymore. And if, you know, if you're selling it, I think we're all stocked up.
Of course, access to good mental health care could be helpful too, but who are we kidding?
Oh my God.
That's not going to happen in our lifetime.
Access.
What about these active shooter situations that happen in not just movie theaters, but malls? What about schools and then the trauma that it sets for those kids for life in terms of ever feeling comfortable being safe, secure anywhere?
Well, you know, it whirls around. I mean, I think there's a lot of kids that are going to feel that based on, you know, this unnamed disease that we've been dealing with.
Spanish flu.
There's huge trauma components, whether you're in the World Trade Center or watching on TV. Now, I think it's worse if you're in the World Trade Center, actually, but you can
Well,
get it from watching things on TV and how your fantasy life or your imagination goes into those places.
let's shift it.
What about if you're an empath, let's say? You can kind of feel what's going on. Well, you're going to respond to it. You're going to react.
Yeah. But let's shift it to like terrorist attacks in general.
Okay.
Because like the attack on the U.S. Capitol or 9/11 we already spoke of, or Oklahoma City, or the bombing of the U.S. Cole, you know, they all had different psychological impacts. Why? Well, there were some different number of bodies at the U.S. Capitol as there were at Oklahoma City. There's a different number of bodies on the USS Cole than there were on 9/11. But somehow it seems like if you could normalize for that, they would still be different because of those cornerstones that we've touched on in terms of your perspective and the sense of security and safety and ingenuity and all of that. Because the attack on the Capitol is much more symbolic. You know, if a plane would have gone into the Capitol, which is supposedly what Shanksville plane was doing, that would have been much more symbolic than even New York. I think it would have been the leading story, unless people
You know, a plane or something hit the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Nobody seems to be that upset about that as opposed to the Twin
That's a good point.
Towers.
That's a good point. But again, why? There's something there that we're scratching the surface and we're starting to think about. And then what about people who really get wacky, like, oh, let's say Waco or Ruby Ridge or Heaven's Gate or Jonestown? I mean, where do you want me to stop? There's been a ton of them. They're mass casualty events. They're very, very hard for people to understand.
If you look at Jonestown or I'm guessing Ruby Ridge or Waco, there is a component of we do what we're told. And that's
back to the Holocaust.
That's the story of the Holocaust. And, you know, as we wind down the hour, I think it's important to just put a bookmark that what we're trying to do with the show is to expand our notion of who we are and how our mind and brain and heart work, in order for people to expand into the fullness of their being. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about prevents full expression of our humanity. Whether there's oppression from government, like after 9/11, we got this Homeland Security stuff, or not. It threatens our security and maybe even our own integrity of who we are as separate human beings. So,
and that's critical to not lose, because like freedom and democracy itself, it must be constantly surveilled and maintained. So we got to make sure our laws are up to date and appropriate, and we got to be able to apply them correctly, even fairly, because, you know, we're all one, and even a murderer feels a shock and a loss at a mass casualty event, and that blows my mind. Like, this is someone who's capable of taking someone else's life intentionally, and yet they have feelings. What? It doesn't make sense on the face.
They may have feelings like for a little dog that dies, but not for a human being, or they may be torturing the animal.
Well, let's say someone who shot the convenience store clerk during a robbery. You're telling me they didn't feel anything if 9/11 were to happen?
It's up for grabs. I had a buddy who worked in the toughest prison. He was a psychologist in the toughest prison in Ohio. And what he told me was that murderers were, and this is a whole different topic, I guess, will fall into three categories. One, you can just kill them because they're never going to get it. Why did you kill them? Because he would interview them. Well, they were home. Then there's one that's like a murder of passion. They're never going to hurt anybody again. Their lives are effectively destroyed at that point because of the guilt that they feel. And he said there was a third group that was about a third that he couldn't quite figure out. And this is not a scientific exploration, but it is an attempt to understand the psyche and how we work as human beings amidst what seem to be mass casualties that are happening all the time around us. And because the news cycle is so big, we're going to hear about what happened in Singapore or China or Egypt or some other place. We're going to hear about it fast and often. So to be continued, I'm sure, you know, there are plenty of mass casualty events.
Yeah, sadly they press on.
Yeah.
So I was thinking next week I want to crawl into a hole somewhere, a really safe, dark, comforting, warm, almost amniotic environment,
Yes.
and do a show on sensory deprivation.
Woohoo! I'd go for that.
It's going to be a fun one. There's lots of things that you can do to deprive or distort your senses. Non-pharmacological. We've done all those shows, not all of them. And more importantly, what happens when your senses are deprived?
Right.
And then finally, what do you do with those experiences and memories?
These and other interesting artifacts next week on Alt Psych. Be well.
Well, you
Well, be
prematured
well.
me.
Well, be well.
You prematured me.
I didn't, did I?
Be well.
Still recording.
I got you.
Next week, folks.
All right, I'll be here waiting.